Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ballot Meridian 2014 election coverage on Home TV. I'm Joanne Paul, and tonight is Wednesday, July 30th. We are very pleased to be joined for the next hour by two Republican candidates seeking election to the United States House of Representatives to represent the 8th Congressional District in Michigan. The candidates are Mike Bishop and Tom McMillan. Thank you both for being with us. We appreciate it. Of course, the winner of the Republican primary on Election Day in August will face off against the Democratic counterpart in November, along with any third-party candidates. Of course, our phone lines are open for you to call in a question if you would like. The number is area code 517-349-1232. Again, 349-1232. Or you can tweet your question at Home TV, #BallotMeridian. Of course, if you would like to ask a question for tonight's candidates, they must be phrased in such a way that all the candidates can answer. You cannot ask a question directed toward a specific candidate. Of course, I want to again thank the candidates so much for being here and taking the time, and to give you 30 seconds or so to make an opening statement and why voters should vote for you, starting alphabetically. Let's go with Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Mike Bishop, and I am a candidate for Congress. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I am born and raised in Michigan. My wife and I are blessed with 3 young children, and have had the opportunity to serve in the community in the past in many different endeavors. I've served in local government, state government, and now in the private sector, and committed to doing whatever I can to helping this district be represented in Congress. I'm proud to be supported and endorsed by Mike Rogers, the Right to Life of Michigan, and from various other organizations. Thank you all very much for the time.
Thank you. Mr. McMillan.
And those that are watching have had plenty of opportunities to see me. I've had 13 weekly town halls. I think it's important that we have a congressman who will make sure that they're connected to the citizens, because we've got a lot of tough decisions. If we need congressmen, and I will be that person who will go and really deal with the debt and deficit, the overreach of the federal government, the lawlessness that we see coming out of the Obama administration. People are frustrated with this, and they want a congressman who will go there and who will make tough decisions, and then also return back and make sure that you're well connected to the people, and I'll be that congressman.
All right, thank you so much both. The format for the debate consists of a standard list of questions, 2 minutes each for a question, and then 1 minute for additional rebuttal if that is what you would like. Please indicate to me if that is what you want to take, and I will go to you for your additional minute. If not, I'll go on to a different question, and of course we will ask questions as we kind of filter through the phone calls that we may get here tonight. The first question would be, what accomplishment are you most proud of in your political career? Mr. McMillan.
You know, I was somebody who, with Common Core, there's a real concern that the nationalization of education, and Michigan became one of the states that has gone in with this Common Core and the nationalization. And things were moving along until I stepped up and made sure that I introduced legislation. We had a good hearing. We couldn't get a bill through to stop Common Core, but what I was able to do was make sure that in the budget last year, the governor, although he's done a lot of good things, he was proclaiming that Common Core was important and important to the state. 8 weeks later, he was signing a budget defunding Common Core. And that doesn't happen unless you've got a legislator who, I organized 8 other legislators, and we basically made sure that the budget didn't get to the governor's desk unless we defunded Common Core. We had a debate. There was a ton of pressure from people that said that we can't do this, you shouldn't do it, Tom. We stuck firm, and we made sure that we defunded Common Core. The governor signed a budget he didn't want to sign. And that's what we're going to need in Congress. We need somebody who's going to make sure that we use the budget process. That is where the power of the legislature is. And if we're going to deal with the borders and securing the borders, if we're going to deal with some of the lawlessness, the executive orders, the time for legislators to do that is in the budget, and it takes a lot of backbone. And I think I showed that during the budget showdown last year. We stopped Common Core. We had a long debate. We were the focus in the nation on education and Common Core last summer. Unfortunately, they moved forward with the Common Core. There's a record roll call vote. But in the meantime, the testing, we beat up the testing and realized that we don't want nationalized testing. This last budget that was signed, we got rid of the national testing for next year. And I think that sometimes you need to stand up to people. During that whole issue, Superintendent Flanagan said there's no way that we can have our own test. We have to have a nationalized test. And I challenged him on that, and in fact, we're going to have our own test next year. So it's really standing up to bureaucrats and to your own party when you have to.
Okay. Mr. Bishop.
Well, I got into government for a simple reason, and that was to bring a responsible voice to the process. When I arrived in Lansing, we were under the leadership of Governor Engler. I served as a state House member and a state Senate member. I was elected to Senate Majority Leader in my second term, during which time Governor Granholm was governor. And I think if I had to look back and think of the proudest moment in my life, in my career, in terms of what I was able to get done, it would be that moment when I sat across from Governor Granholm and she said that she was going to move forward with the tax increases for our budgets. And I told her that the citizens wouldn't put up with it, that my caucus would not put up with it. She told me I couldn't do it without tax increases. I left the office immediately, went back to my caucus and told the caucus what happened. I told them that the governor has just challenged us. We need to balance the budget without a tax increase. In a week, we had every single one of our 15 budgets out of the chamber. We had a balanced budget by May 15th. And I'm very proud of the fact that we did not pass a tax increase. We lived within our means, and that's the way government should be run. We prioritize our spending. That's not happening at the national level right now. I believe that I can take my experience from state government, my experience from working with tyrannical style executive leaders like Governor Granholm to now in Washington with President Obama. I believe I can apply this experience, and I think I can do it well. We can bring common sense. We can bring reason back to the process. I also believe that that process requires that we honor and defend the Constitution. Another thing, lawlessness is in fact a common occurrence in Washington, D.C. All these things happened under my watch when I was fighting Jennifer Granholm, and I did everything I could to stop it. And I'm proud of the fact that we were able to reduce the size of government while Governor Granholm was governor.
As a rebuttal, I just don't know if he's certainly not talking about 2007 when he gave in to Governor Granholm and we had the largest tax increase we've seen. That was the time to stand up to Governor Granholm. In fact, we ended up raising the income tax, or Mike allowed the raising of the income tax from 3.95 to 4.35. Huge increase in families and citizens, and the MBT was, which was a horrible tax to begin with, compounded, and it became extremely bad with another large tax increase. Businesses were leaving, the state was spiraling, and it was a very bad time, and it was something that was when we really need somebody to stand up to Governor Granholm.
Additional?
Distortions in truth. It's unfortunate that we've gotten to this point. I was rated the number one most conservative legislator in Michigan, senator in Michigan, while a majority leader. It's never happened before. Tom speaks of a time when Governor Granholm had full control. Our Senate members were fortunate enough to be able to stand up to her and say no. During our tenure and my leadership, the size of government actually went down. The amount of spending from state resources actually went down. Since Tom has been in the legislature, the spending on state resources has gone up almost $8 billion. That's under Republican leadership. I would argue that the people of the state would benefit from my leadership again.
Well, let's talk about some of the other statements that have been made from one camp to the next and back and forth. It has been said about you, Mr. McMillan, that you voted against drug testing for welfare recipients. It has been said against Mr. Bishop that he voted to waste taxpayer dollars on green energy subsidies. Do you want to set the record straight now on what you stand for and what misinformation there is out there? I believe it's your turn.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to. As my opponent probably knows, it was unconstitutional to legislate the bill that I voted no on. I'm going to follow the Constitution, even when a vote is a little bit difficult, because, and even the bill sponsor acknowledges that the federal government doesn't recognize medical marijuana. Like it or not, that's part of our Constitution. That was not, the exemption was not in the bill, so that was certainly one of the reasons I voted no. The second reason was I insisted, and I put up an amendment that would require, if we're going to drug test citizens and welfare, we're also going to drug test business executives who get corporate welfare. And I thought that was only fair. they gavelled that down as well. And I will admit that I do have a concern with the federal government, or with government, taking DNA of citizens, and there was not a clear how they're going to dispose of that DNA. So, I mean, there are certainly concerns with that. I don't have any problem. I did vote for a bill that said if somebody is fired because they fail a drug test that's done by a private entity at a company, that they shouldn't get unemployment, and the business shouldn't have to pay for that. So I certainly, am very clear with regard to, drug testing in the private sector. But clearly, the number one reason was it was unconstitutional, and I'm going to follow the Constitution.
Mr. Bishop?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the premise that it's unconstitutional. I don't see in any way that it's unconstitutional. In fact, the state has a compelling interest in public dollars and how they're spent. It's a responsibility of the state to do whatever it can to ensure that those dollars are spent in a way that's consistent with the benefit. And I don't believe that law was unconstitutional. I would have supported it. Second of all, you asked me about the energy bill that I supported. My last term in the legislature, a bill was brought before the legislature in long debate regarding the future of our state and how we would move forward with regard to our spiraling energy costs. It was my responsibility to find some sort of common ground with the other side to ensure that we had a path going forward. I supported a bill that would create kind of an all-of-the-above system whereby the state would pursue any and all objective possibilities for future for this state so that we could be energy independent. The cost of energy is way too high in this state. It's way too high in this country. But it's a lot more expensive in Michigan because we live in a peninsula and this has all got to be delivered to us. So we've got to think out of the box, and there are a lot of natural resources here. The technology is not quite there yet for us to engage in a full-scale support of this kind of alternative energy. But I do think it's the responsibility of business. I believe it's the responsibility of government to ensure that we go down a path that is responsible. And in this case, I felt that my vote to support the path that was taken was responsible, and it was consistent with our goal to become energy independent. And as much as people want to call it a subsidy, this is by no stretch of the imagination a subsidy. Government supports and funds priority items, and there was nothing in this bill that would be different than any other priority item in state government.
Sure, yeah, I'd like to rebut. I mean, I'm not sure if you're talking about the mandate for green energy, which because of Mr. Bishop's vote, we all are paying more for electricity because of the windmills that don't spin that we see in the center of the state and up north. This idea that we get away from the market and we start, giving into special interests is not something we need. It results in higher costs. As far as the corporate subsidies, there was a lot more than one bill. There were 23 bills in the 2 years that Mike and I served. There was plenty more before that. Film subsidies were sending all kinds of money to Hollywood. But as far as green energy, we are paying hundreds of millions of dollars of corporate subsidies, checks out the door. And that was to lure companies. I remember the Democrat speaker wouldn't let me speak on the House, but we paid $100 million, and Mike voted for it, for 300 jobs to come to the Wixom plant for green energy. Well, that money's coming out of our pockets, citizens and businesses, and given to special interests, and it's just bad policy. We can't pick winners and losers.
We encourage you to call in your questions for our candidates. The number 349-1232 if you would like to participate. We do have a caller on the line, Emma from Howell. Emma, thank you for being patient. Welcome to the show. What is your question?
Oh, yes. Hydraulic fracturing has come to the 8th District. When you get to Washington, how will you protect the citizens' health and safety and the water systems in your district from hydraulic fracturing?
All right, thank you very much for the question. Mr. Bishop.
Well, this is consistent with the discussion we had about energy and the need to pursue any and all forms of energy resources here in our great state to ensure that we can control the costs of energy, but also to ensure that we have energy in the future. I understand, and I know this is a very big issue, especially among those folks who live in neighborhoods today who have seen this locally, that there's concern on the safety of fracking. And in my opinion, this is a science that needs to be pursued. But it also is a balancing test. It's the responsibility of policymakers to look at the great natural resources of this state and balance the impact on those natural resources, along with, perhaps as in this case, safety of the families around where this is happening, with the benefit. And in this case, it's proven that the fracking has produced and continues to push more and stable sources of energy. And I just believe it's our responsibility to pursue that kind of science. But at the same time, you've got to make sure that it's safe, and you've got to make sure that it's not going to harm the environment. And if, in fact, if there was evidence of anything negative to the environment or to public safety, it would be my vote to stop it immediately and to rethink how we pursue this particular type of science. But I think it's important that we, as policymakers, we grab onto any opportunity we can to create those opportunities for energy in this state, and make sure that we don't turn our back on the possibilities. Tom talks about subsidies. This isn't about subsidies. This is about creating an environment where these kind of opportunities can grow and prosper, that we can pursue them, and we can take part in the process of making Michigan more than a one-trick pony.
Mr. McMillan.
Well, I certainly think that if there's any dangers, if the water supply, water tables are getting contaminated, that's certainly an issue and should be dealt with. But I will say, I met with a business owner in Oakland County recently who said that, that fracking, what it has done, he has a company that heats metal and heats parts for the automotive industry to extremely high temperatures, and then gets for paint and puts paint on it. He said that we have a 3-to-1 advantage in cost on natural gas because of fracking over China and over Japan, over other countries. So, I certainly want to make sure that we don't get rid of the one of the few potentially advantages we have. I know we're all concerned about jobs going over to China and going overseas, but this fracking, as I'm beginning to understand, is really giving us quite a competitive advantage. Our businesses, our jobs. So I think that we want to make sure that we don't harm that opportunity, and yet certainly make sure that there's any safety concerns that are legitimate, that are proven, are certainly dealt with.
Additional time? Okay. We do have a caller on the line, John from East Lansing. Thank you for calling in. What is your question?
Yes, I'm looking for someone who can go to Washington and be a leader on day one. So I'm looking for an instance where each gentleman has taken an issue from beginning, rolled up their sleeves, got to work, and got it completed that they're very proud of.
All right. Thank you very much for your question. Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, one of the areas is on indigent defense. This is something that I had, if you would have told me that I was going to be the leader on indigent defense, I would have been very surprised, but Congressman Amash actually encouraged me to make sure that I understood the issue during our first term, and I kind of took the ball and made sure that we actually, from the beginning of this reform that people had talked about for decades, we have, it became clear to me that we're talking about taking away somebody's freedom. We're talking about locking somebody up, and certainly we want the bad guys locked up. But there are a lot of places in our state where, you've got a person who is being defended for a felony, who's being defended, the attorney is a kid 6 months out of college, doesn't know what he's doing, and, justice may not be served in those instances. Certainly it might not be. So I took it from beginning, made sure I wrote the legislation. We almost got it through, and during my second term, we finally got it through this last term. And I worked with all sides. I'm certainly known as a strong conservative. Some people wonder if I'll be able to work with the other side. Ask anybody involved with indigent defense and the final reform of that in the state, and they will see I worked with the left and right. And I think that it was extremely important. I'm very proud of that. Again, we certainly should be locking away the bad guys, but taking away somebody's liberty when they were innocent, I don't know that the government could do anything worse than that. right, because of my leadership, that legislation was signed into law last year and is now moving forward so that we'll have more uniformity throughout the state with regard to indigent defense.
Mr. Bishop.
Well, I think the biggest difference between my opponent and me is that I served in a leadership capacity at a time when our state was controlled by Democratic leadership. And it was my responsibility to stand up for a principled cause, which is good government, and for the taxpayers. And I was facing a very, very aggressive governor and Democratic House leadership. And I was able to work with that House leadership and the Democratic governor to pass balanced budgets. There was plenty of opportunity for the governor to steamroll us. But through the help of an uprising, which I believe was the start of the Tea Party here in Michigan, the people of the state of Michigan were sick and tired of the direction of the state, the constant focus on creating more revenue. And I'm proud of the fact that my caucus stood up to the governor and took the legitimate position that we had enough of government, we had enough of spending, and we actually dialed down the size of government. And I mentioned this earlier, but my greatest accomplishment while serving in government is to be able to pass budgets without tax increases and do it in an environment where Democrats were in the majority, which is exactly consistent with what we see in Congress today. And I'd like to be able to take that experience and that skill to Congress today as a challenge to do the same thing, to get a hold of an $18 billion budget, $18 trillion, excuse me, T's, B's, M's, $18 trillion budget debt, national debt, a United States Senate that hasn't passed a budget since 2009. It's a complete abdication of responsibility, and I want to take my experience to Washington, D.C. and make a difference.
I would just say that he certainly didn't stand up enough, because there was certainly a large tax increase on families, on businesses during the 2007 showdown, and I think that was the time when we really needed to make sure that that he didn't give in to Jennifer Granholm and the Democrats on the budget, and we had a huge tax increase. It was very large, and I think that was the time to make sure that we didn't have one, and he in fact did give in. So I don't know, maybe other budgets, but that was the one that was the real pinnacle that was very important, and he was unfortunately gave in on that one.
No one gave in. I want to be perfectly clear, full stop on that. I was instrumental in stopping the governor from passing one tax increase after the next. There was a point in time when even Republicans lost their gauge, and I had 5 of my members peel off and vote for a tax increase. I did everything I could to stop that, and I continued to push. But that's what happened. I can tell you with good faith and with strong conviction that while I served as majority leader, our state spent less. We actually cut the size of spending. We cut our debt, and we conducted ourselves in a responsible manner. In fact, there was a net reduction in 4.5% in the amount of spending in this state during my 4 years as majority leader. Since Tom has served, it's gone up $8 billion. That's a fact. And he also, by the way, as much as he complains, voted for a tax increase on seniors, the pension tax. He voted for a tax increase on the income tax. He got rid of the homestead property tax, which goes directly towards families. You have to be consistent, and you can't flip-flop on issues.
Again, we welcome your input on our candidate interviews and debate here tonight. The number 349-1232. We do have Rachel from Rochester, who has been patiently waiting on the line. Welcome, Rachel. What is your question?
Hi, this question is for Tom. I was just wondering, when you go to Washington, what will you do to stay in contact with your district?
All right, thank you for the comment. We obviously can't direct, so I believe the question goes first to Mr. Bishop.
Well, I appreciate the question. I think that's the most important thing. As constituent service to me is the most important thing a member of elected government can do, whether you serve on the library board or if you serve in the United States Congress or whatever you do. We are at the service of the people that we represent. And I have conducted myself as a legislator, both as a state representative, a state senator, as a majority leader, with the utmost consistency with regard to my constituent service. I have always, in my office, and you can speak with anybody who's ever contacted our office, emphasized the importance of making sure that anybody who calls receives our full faith and confidence, that they receive our 100% attention. There's a statistic out there, and I always tell this to my staff, that very few people ever call their elected member of government. And after that, those people are even more unlikely not to call back. So you got one shot with those who call. And the goal is to make sure that you address their issue, you respond to their issue, and you resolve their issue, and you bring it to a conclusion. We always made sure we brought every matter to a conclusion in our office. I expect to have a local office. I expect to have local staff. I do not like to be in government circles. When I was majority leader, I went home every single night. I never stayed in Lansing. I always went home. I think it's important to be grounded. I believe that public service is a sacred trust. And it's the responsibility of a member to go back and make sure that he is with his community and that he does whatever he can to stay connected with the community. And so I'll be having public hours for constituents. I'll be doing town hall meetings. I'll be doing all kinds of swing-throughs through the district to make sure that I stay connected, and I'm eager to do that.
Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, I mean, making sure that I'm connected with the citizens is something that I have always done. I've been in the legislature, in the state house for about 67 months, and I've held basically 67 monthly town halls. It's something that a couple might have been snowed out, but you know, it's something that I think is very important. I don't know how many my opponent had when he was in the legislature, but it's something that even, you know, Bruce, you know who you are. I get liberals to show up every once in a while to my district hours and videotape an entire hour. And, you know, try to ask questions and gotcha questions and stuff like that. And, you know, a lot of legislators would say this is too risky, I'm not going to be out there in front of people. But I continually will have monthly meetings, and actually even liberals and I will agree from time to time on issues. And but I certainly feel it's extremely important to stay connected. And so I hold those district hours. And then it's come over into my congressional campaign. Like I said, I've held 13. Tomorrow will be my 14th town hall. Weekly town hall. And I think it's, you know, I do robocalls to invite people. We usually have between 20 and 50 citizens there. We engage for an hour in very good dialogue and discussion. And I look forward to that. You know, a lot of legislators, they hold up in Washington or in Lansing, and they really don't get out and talk to folks because it's a little risky. I mean, you never know what kind of questions you're going to get. You know, there could be harassing people there. But, you know, I really feel that it's important to stay connected and stay engaged. So I will be passionately making sure as a congressman that you see me regularly. As a matter of fact, there are decisions that are going to need to be made that are very tough on the budget, the debt and deficit. I mean, if we're really going to deal with it, we've got to put things on the table that people don't talk. Before those votes, you will see me regularly, because I want to make sure that I get around the media. You're not liberal media, but the media out there is often liberal, and they'll spin it a different way. I want to get right to the people and talk to them about why I'm about to make tough decisions, because we're really going to deal with the debt and deficit, not do this window dressing that keeps happening.
Okay. We do have a Twitter question for you tonight. What do you do to protect seniors? Do you believe nursing home employees should have criminal background checks? This is from Stu. Mr. McMillan.
That's his consultant, sure. So yeah, he knows that before I voted on a bill that was given to us during lame duck. The Democrats were in charge during my first term. It was in December, late at night. I think it was probably midnight. And Congressman Amash and I were talking about this bill after their hit piece came out. And it was clear that, I mean, we got it. And we were given 2 minutes to vote on it. It was discharged. It's a procedure that's you discharge a bill, which means it didn't have a hearing, didn't have a committee hearing. Came out. The Democrats said, you know, laid this 22-page bill on our desk and said, you're going to vote on it in 2 minutes. You know, me and Congressman, you know, then he was a state representative. I have a hard time voting on bills that I don't know what's in it. I know Nancy Pelosi doesn't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with that. And so I voted no. The fact of the matter is also that there was already background checks required in nursing homes. Everybody knows that except the people writing his literature, my opponent's literature. So there was already background checks for nursing home employees. This dealt with many different aspects. Mainly it was dealing with people who have, companies who have more than one building, whether they should have a background check every time they go to a different building. There was also some, ability to use the state police and some checks that they, some lists that they have. But really it was a complex bill, and when you're not given a lot of time, I hope my opponent wouldn't vote for a bill he doesn't know what's in it as well. And so I certainly voted no. I think it's important to protect seniors. I think it's, certainly government is often the problem. Certainly look at Obamacare. That's going to be very harmful to seniors, and also a drain on Medicare. So, I want to get government out of Washington and back to the locals. If seniors have a problem in Washington, it's very difficult to go there and get it solved. We need to push power out of Washington and back down to the states.
Mr. Bishop?
Well, anybody who has had an elderly parent or grandparent has had this issue, had to address this issue in some way, shape, or form. It's tragic to see it happen, but it does happen. And as elected member of government, it was one of the biggest issues that I ever heard about. I mean, I would hear, maybe not daily, but weekly, from a concerned citizen about something that happened at an elderly facility. Something that was tragic and absolutely preventable, and it just, for some reason, has not been addressed. There is no state law requirement for background checks for those who work in these facilities. To me, it's just common sense. I try to apply common sense to issues, and this is one of those environments where I think we have to have a stepped-up responsibility for the folks that work there. If you work in an environment like this, you have a responsibility, a stepped-up responsibility for the protection and safety of folks who can't protect themselves. And it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that the folks that work there are trustworthy and that they don't have a pattern or a history of bad things. And there's a lot of bad things out there that happen. We need to have these background checks. It's common sense. It's straightforward. And to fall back on the excuse that you don't vote for it because you didn't get enough time to review it is a bit ridiculous in this case. I can see if you're applying it to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that was ridiculous. They didn't spend the time. But this is rudimentary, straightforward. You have a bill that protects seniors. You ought to support it. You have a bill that addresses something that all of us as elected officials see every day. You need to get behind it. If the first time you're hearing about it is when it's discharged, you're not doing your job as a legislator.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, there are background checks. That bill actually moved out, so I'm assuming it moved over to the Senate, and he was in charge of the Senate, so I'm assuming he didn't bottle it up. If it didn't get to the governor's desk, it's because he stopped it. And so, but before the bill was even introduced, there were background checks on nursing home employees. It's extremely clear. It's unfortunate that there's untruths about it, but I know that they did polling. It polls well. The guy who asked the question is his high-paid consultant, who's also lying in other campaigns. And so, in the 4th District and against Mr. Bentivolio. So, same guy. I expect this from Stu. Not a surprise, but I would have hoped that Mike would have said no. Let's not go someplace where there's untruths. And he knows very well that before that bill came out, that nursing home employees were required to have background checks.
It's not true. State law did not require that nursing homes have background checks for their employees. Now, some may have voluntarily done it, and they should, but they weren't required to.
Yeah, they were.
And let's face it, we just can't rely on these facilities to do what's best for our elderly, for our parents, for our grandparents. And this is the core function of government, is to ensure that people are safe. That is the primary function of government. And if you see an environment wherein your grandmother or your grandfather or your parent is not safe, it is completely unacceptable to allow that environment to exist. And as a legislator, I, in good conscience, could not turn my back on that.
We do have another caller with a question. Val from East Lansing. Welcome to the show. What is your question?
Thank you. You're seeing the legalization of marijuana throughout the country now. I expect this to go to a federal level as each state is doing this just like alcohol. If we had a bill a federal bill that said recreational use of marijuana is legal, would you vote for or against that?
All right. Thank you very much for the question. Mr. Bishop, I believe it's to you.
Well, this is an issue that has caught fire, especially in this state. We've seen a ballot initiative pass the state by a whopping majority having to do with medicinal marijuana. I support the people of the state and the great numbers of folks who came out to support that issue with regard to medicinal marijuana. I do not, however, support recreational use, nor do I support a federal law that would legalize on a federal level the recreational use of marijuana. I think that's irresponsible. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you that in my experience that it will cause chaos. And I've seen it at a local level, and I just can't imagine what would happen if the federal government were to just pop the lid on that and allow recreational use of marijuana and actually, in a way, condone its use. I also have young children. It's my responsibility as a parent to make sure that they make the right decisions. I could not in good conscience vote for a bill like recreational use of marijuana after my parenting with my children and speaking with them on a daily basis about the rights and wrongs and the pressures that they face in life. So I think it's important that Congress look at the issue. States are confused because there are all kinds of, it's a collage of different laws around the country, and the federal law actually supplants all of these local laws. So it's important for the federal government to step up and be a part of the solution to ensure that there's no more confusion out there. But I would steer clear of any bill that would, just in a blanket way, legalize marijuana. But I would focus directly on the medicinal use. I believe that there's science out there. I believe that the folks in medicine have shown that there is scientific use, medicinal use, and I think we should honor that.
Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, I would definitely push it down to the states. I think it should be a state issue. It is the reason why, like I said, even though my opponent says that he would have voted for something unconstitutional, the drug testing of welfare recipients, it is unconstitutional because the federal government does not recognize medical marijuana right now. They would not allow our welfare bill to exempt medical marijuana usage. And so in the bill it was not exempted, which meant it was unconstitutional because our Constitution says that for medical marijuana you can't have any harm or any adverse impact based on their medical marijuana. So it was unconstitutional. And that's the problem. We have a federal government who are making these decisions. So I would want to pass it down to the states. I would vote. I wouldn't want to require states to legalize it. I wouldn't want states to not legalize it. I mean, I would want to make it. There is really a real problem with the federal government. They have way too much power, and I'm going there as a congressman to make sure that we get it out of Washington. That will solve the issues with the debt and deficit, with welfare. I think it goes down to the states. You get a state like California who wants to make sure that anybody who comes in, whether they're legal or not, citizens, get on welfare. Well, they're doing it now because the cost goes on my children and my grandchildren and all of ours. If it was the state of California that had to deal and pay for those welfare benefits, I guarantee you they'd be a lot more careful who they're giving them to. So I think we've got to push power out of Washington, including the decision on marijuana and legalization. Let states decide that. Let the debate happen where most of the policy decisions that are unfortunately made in Washington should be made at the state legislatures.
Additional time?
Federal law does dictate that the consumption, the use of marijuana is illegal. Therefore, a bill that would require welfare recipients to drug test before receiving aid is not unconstitutional. the federal law clearly says it's illegal. It is what it is. I understand that it's not consistent with state law, but the federal law and the federal government that provides this welfare to the citizens says it's illegal. So that is a completely untrue statement. I would disagree with this idea that it's unconstitutional. Secondly, I don't think we got an answer out of that. I told you that I would oppose a bill that would allow for the recreational use of marijuana. If that bill came before the United States Congress, I would vote against the recreational use of marijuana. I'd be interested to know if Tom, if you would support a bill that would allow for recreational use of marijuana.
I answered it. I said no. I want to pass it down to the states. He thinks it's a gotcha. I wish he would actually understand what he's saying. He just made the argument why the bill on drug testing welfare recipients had no exemption for medical marijuana, people who were taking medical marijuana, which was consistent with our Constitution. Therefore, the bill crafter, and I talked to him about this, I said, why is your bill unconstitutional? He said, well, the federal government would not allow us to have an exemption for medical marijuana.
Because it's illegal.
And so, for the federal government, it's illegal, so they wouldn't allow that exemption.
Where do you think
medical marijuana? We allow that in our Constitution, so it would have been unconstitutional. So it's clear, but just like the nursing homes, just like the nursing home background check, it's unfortunate, but my opponent keeps spinning because he doesn't have any real issues to go against.
Don't let the facts get in the way.
Yeah. We have another Twitter question. Have either of you supported the Michigan business tax? I believe that's to you, Mr. McMillan.
Sure. No, I mean, I was very pleased to be somebody who voted against and to repeal the Michigan business tax. It was a disaster, and you see Governor Snyder talking about what a disaster it was. We made tough votes. My opponent, when he talks about this issue, sounds more like Mark Schauer and Jennifer Granholm in attacking myself and Governor Snyder. We just have different opinions. Mike, my opponent, talked highly about the Michigan business tax when in a press conference with Governor Granholm. It was on his YouTube channel for a while until the race started, and he realized that could be a liability. I think it was a disaster. I agree with Governor Snyder. We had to repeal it. It taxed revenues. It didn't tax profits. So I talked to so many businesses, and I talked to business owners, and they said, I just despise that the Michigan business tax, because I was losing money hand over fist, and I was still having to pay taxes. It was horrible. We were the 45th worst state in the nation for taxes. Now we're about the 7th best, and we had to do that because businesses, and some people may not remember this, businesses were just leaving this state in droves, and it was because we had a disaster for a tax that my opponent crafted and made sure that got through the legislature, and then there was a huge tax increase that he allowed on that back in 2007. It was horrible, so I'm very pleased and proud to make sure that we repealed that and got people working. We could talk about income tax. There's certainly, we flattened that tax. We flattened the tax on businesses. There's not all these carve-outs, not all these special interests getting subsidies through the taxes. It was something that we had to do, and I'm very proud that we did.
Mr. Bishop?
It's funny how Michigan families get referred to by my opponent as a special interest, because one of the things that you did, Tom, was immediately get rid of the homestead property tax exemption, which is a tax credit to families, and one that many families in Michigan had an opportunity to take advantage of, and it helped them come tax time. And it's unfortunate that you supported that repeal, and you call families a special interest. That is unfortunate.
No, I didn't.
You just did.
No, it was all your carve-outs that I did.
Oh, well, the carve-out, one of the carve-outs was a tax
increase. For the companies.
Okay, Tom. All right, Tom. You can spit it all you want. Now, another thing is, too, when I became majority leader, my responsibility was to replace the SBT, which was the previous tax that everybody hated. I didn't like the SBT. I don't like the MBT. Nothing's perfect, especially when you've got an administration that can implement. And Governor Granholm and her administration knew how to implement in a way that was the most egregious. I would agree with you. We did everything we could to try and resolve the issues with the MBT. I don't deny that fact. But when Tom came in and decided to replace the MBT like we did the SBT, he decided to replace it with a tax that gave a huge tax break to business, which is great. I mean, that's wonderful. Stand by that. If you want to give a tax decrease to business, then go ahead and do it. But instead, he made up the balance of the revenue with the direct tax on people, on citizens, on humans, which is, to me, the most regressive of all the solutions. A pension tax that was $900 million. You voted for that. A income tax, you stopped the income tax rollback, which even Governor Granholm agreed to. That was another $200 million. And the last one was the homestead property tax, another $200 million.
The Governor Snyder, well, first of all, he sounds a lot like Mark Schauer again. And we know that there's a lot of falsehood behind it. Governor Snyder, initially there was a $900 million. It was about 30% of that, and he knows that the $900 million is a very wrong number, bad number. But we had to make sure that we got rid of the Mike Bishop tax. Was a disaster. It was horrible. You know, if there are no families and no businesses, the few left would be paying a lot more income tax. We had to we've decided to flatten the tax and make sure there are people getting tax cuts right now that are, when they turn 67, they get their first $20,000 per person, $40,000 per couple tax free. We felt that if income is income. Why is it that if somebody who's 58 years old getting a $30,000 pension treated any different than somebody who's 58 years old working at Walmart, and making $30,000? That income should be treated similarly, and we had to do that to eliminate the Michigan business tax. That was the vote before me. That was what I was given. I know he loves the MBT, but I wanted to repeal it.
I don't love the MBT. I'm not a fan of taxes. I don't like to see them, but it's revenue from taxpayers is what it pays for services from the state. Taxes have been around for ages. The question is, how do you form the best possible tax? And I'm not sure there is a one out there that you can do. And I don't suggest to you that the MBT was perfect, but what I am saying is, if you're going to complain about a tax, you have to take responsibility for the taxes you voted for. And if it's $900 million tax increase that you voted for, or it's $800 million.
It was a tax cut of $250 million, and you know it.
Okay, so the tax cut, and that's government speak for $200 million less to the state.
Right.
So it's from the perspective of the state. It's not from the perspective of the grandmas out there or the pensioners out there who have to pay $900 million extra. They could care less.
Million.
Okay, $700 million.
No, it's not even close.
Okay, all right, whatever you say. Why don't you tell us what the total amount was that you increased?
It was a $250 million tax cut.
To the state, but you're not looking at it from the perspective of families and people. That's the problem with government. It's people like you.
Well, the tax increase you allowed to go through was certainly, hit every family and every business. It was a horrible tax.
Okay, we are almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you to limit your responses to like 30 seconds on these questions. Where do you stand on the NSA? Mr. McMillan? Mr. Bishop, I'm sorry.
I'm a constitutional conservative. I believe that it's our responsibility as a member of government, especially, to stand up and fight for the Constitution. If there are infractions, if they are, in which we've seen, situations where our government is spying on us without a warrant or without due process, I'm opposed to that. And I think we have to do whatever we can to make sure the Obama administration holds our government agencies responsible, and that Eric Holder and the folks in the Attorney General's office make sure that they step up and enforce the laws as well, especially the Constitution.
Mr. McMillan?
I was extremely disappointed when our current congressman sat with Dianne Feinstein and defended the spying and the gathering of data on all of us, the mass gathering. I certainly oppose, without a warrant, just treating us all like criminals. And I'm really, getting fed up with that. I've got resolution in the legislature calling on NSA Director James Clapper to be prosecuted for lying to Congress. He certainly did. I also have legislation that makes sure that we will not assist in doing this as a state, and we should make sure that people who, businesses in Michigan government does not assist the NSA in this illegal, unwarranted collection of data and treating us all like criminals. It has to stop.
So would you vote with Congress to sue the president for overreach?
Sue the president for overreach. He's certainly done plenty, whether it was Benghazi or the IRS, or there's been enough to sue him. I would certainly join in and make sure that if there's been laws broken, which I don't think anybody thinks hasn't. I mean, the IRS scandal is incredibly disturbing. I mean, if they're allowed to lose emails, I think that Katie barred the door. I mean, who knows what's next? So I think where there has been criminal wrongdoing, certainly I think there should be lawsuits. Whatever we can do, whether it's the illegal immigration and the kids being shipped here as opposed to staying on the border, I think we need to, if he's doing illegal things, we definitely need to sue him and try and stop him.
Mr. Bishop?
I think there's been complete lawlessness in the federal government. We've seen on any of a number of occasions, whether it's the IRS, whether what's going on on the borders, whether what we're seeing with Obamacare, with the selective application of the law. All of these things are in violation of the law itself and the Constitution, because you've got a president who decides he wants to legislate from his office with a stroke of a pen. That is frighteningly tyrannical, and it reminds all of us of a monarchy. And it's the responsibility of government to control the other branch of government, and they have not done that yet. The Justice Department should be involved. They are not. They're completely gone. Right. And it's Congress that may have to step up and sue.
30 seconds now. Would you vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, and what would you put in its place?
I believe in the full repeal of the Affordable Care Act. I believe it's a complete abomination of a solution. We were supposed to be looking at the cost of health care and the spiraling cost of health care. Instead, we created this mammoth behemoth of a piece of legislation that just drove up the costs, didn't even address the costs, and just determined in its finality that government would pay for it. It's going to crush small business, and we ought to find ways to repeal it and replace it with something patient-oriented that gives patients the right back to do what they want for their families and themselves.
Mr. McMillan.
See, this is the difference between me and my opponent. I don't want the federal government deciding this at all. I don't want the federal government to solve this issue. I want a full repeal and send it back to the states. States were trying to deal with this. Romney Care over in Massachusetts, it was more socialized. Let a state try that. I think they'll pay the penalty. The businesses and people will leave for more free markets. But certainly, if we have problems with whatever scheme somebody comes up with at the federal level, when those problems arise, and there's always unintended consequences, you don't want to go to Washington to solve them. We need to go to the states. That's why we got to push it out.
Should there be a balanced budget amendment at the federal level? 30 seconds.
Oh, absolutely. And I was somebody who voted for, and it came through a committee that I sit on, and make sure that we will try to have, even have a convention of the states and make sure that we have a balanced budget amendment. So certainly the federal government, I will be pushing to make sure, because right now it's a lot of window dressing. Both parties talk about they're going to balance the budget 10 years from now. Well, we know that that's just window dressing, and the voters are catching on, so they won't get that from me. I'll be very upfront with them, and we do need a balanced budget amendment.
Mr. Bishop.
Yes, wholeheartedly, I would support that. It's the one thing that kept us afloat here in Michigan and in most of the states. Our state government requires that we balance our budget every year. We fought and did everything we could to make sure that we righted the ship every year, that we avoided tax increases. But what saved us every year was that requirement that we balance the budget, that we live within our means. And the federal government hasn't done that. We've got $18 trillion in debt. We've got a budget deficit of almost $2 trillion with a T, and it's ridiculous, and people are fed up.
We are just about out of time. You each have now about 30 seconds to make your final plea to voters on why they should vote for you in the primary. We began with Mr. Bishop before, so we will begin with Mr. McMillan.
Certainly. Well, I would appreciate your vote on August 5th. We need to send congressmen, and I will be that congressman, who are really going to deal with the problems, whether it's the debt and deficit, Obamacare, the crony capitalism, just the general overreach of the federal government. we need to make sure that we send somebody, and I will be that person, that is, I'm not going there to go to fancy balls or anything like that or big meetings. I'm going there to make tough decisions because our country's in deep trouble, and I will be that person that is not listening to special interests, but will be there for the ordinary citizens.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Go ahead.
I had one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I closed it up for you. I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, thank you all very much for this this forum. I want to thank the voters of the 8th District. I would like the opportunity to represent you. I'd be honored to represent you. I've had the opportunity to do so in the past. I've fought for you in the past. I'm not afraid to stand up to either sides of the aisle to do what's right. I've got children. I've got a vested interest in the future of this great country and this great state. I look forward to taking my experience that I've had over the years to Washington, D.C. and making a difference. Thank you all very much.
All right, now, thank you both so much for being here, taking time out of your schedules to do this. Very informative. I do thank you for that. I don't know that you can make a bad decision on voting for either one of you, so thank you as well. I'd like to thank you for joining us here tonight and to invite you to join us again as we look at the Democratic candidates tomorrow. Good night.